Hey, we are excited to present some information regarding our anonymous reporting app this year that we are working with Guadalupe County Crime Stoppers, P3 Campus Anonymous Reporting app, as well as Ms. Castillo with that will be discussing dating violence and relationship violence. I did want to just let everyone know we do have several members from the district here in attendance, and so with that we are just going to jump right in, and we will have Kendall Mills from P3 come and discuss their app.
Hi guys. Can everybody hear me? I don't normally use microphones, so awesome. So my name's Kendall Mills. I am the Development Engagement Coordinator for P3 Campus. So I'm going to just kind of tell you guys a little bit about what P3 Campus is, why it is important, why it's an important component of school safety programs and initiatives on our campuses, and what SCUCISD is doing to get this ready and provide this service to your students. So do I point it right there? Or? It might not be working. Okay. Yeah, so real simply, P3 Campus is a vehicle that allows your students to share information, whether that be concerns about a friend struggling with something, all the way to bullying, and of course what we never want to happen, school shootings or targeted school violence. So we're a vehicle that allows the students to share that information freely with you guys. One of the biggest questions we get is why, thank you, why P3 Campus is important. And this is my favorite topic, so I will try to keep it really short because I could talk for hours about why P3 Campus is important. A lot of studies have been done, but one of the biggest studies, the very first study done by the US Secret Service and Department of Education, came out in 2002. And they looked at 37 school shootings that spanned about 30 years, give or take a few. And they found some pretty alarming things that I'm sure a lot of you have heard before and know. Things like 93% of the attackers in these situations that they studied exhibited some kind of concerning behavior that was noticed by students, peers, by teachers, and a majority of them had undiagnosed or unaddressed mental health issues. But one of the biggest things that study really brought up was somebody knew. In a majority of those shootings, in 81% of those attacks that they looked at, somebody knew, besides the attacker, that something was going to happen. In the years since then, we've learned that mental health is a really big component of school safety. If we really want a comprehensive school safety program, we have to address mental health in our schools as well, so that we can be preventative, so that we can take measures to address those red flags properly before it leads to something like a school shooting. The CDC came out with a study that showed what we already know: teen depression and suicide is on the rise. But more alarmingly, 4 out of 5 teens who attempted suicide told somebody about it, whether that be a student or somebody, a teacher, they told somebody. And we also know that 5 out of 7 of those kids didn't get the help that they needed until it was too late. So one of the big takeaways from all of this, especially that 2002 study, was all of this can be prevented as long as we provide our kids with the tools to share information. In 2008, the Department of Education and the Secret Service revisited that 2002 study because they had some questions. They really wanted to know, 81% of you knew something was going on, 93% of you observed concerning behavior. Why didn't you say anything? What stopped you from saying something? And they got a wide array of answers, but it really boiled down to one underlying theme. It had to do with the campus climate. Just a couple examples offhand of their answers were, I didn't know who to tell. I didn't think that my report would be taken seriously. I feared retaliation or retribution from other peers if I was labeled a snitch. Just things like that. And so one of the solutions that they came up with was providing an anonymous reporting service, and that's what P3 Campus does. We are 100% anonymous, which means we remove all of those fears, those roadblocks that are preventing students from sharing information, sharing concerns that they may have about things that happen on campus. And it's it's an extremely important component of that, of our program. And yeah, so what can our kids report? We've learned through data and through a lot of our programs. We are in statewide programs in Colorado, Nevada, Wyoming. We also power the national organization Sandy Hook Promise. We power their anonymous reporting app called Say Something. And we've learned through the years that these schools have had our anonymous reporting app that opening the field of reporting, what students can share, not just concerns about school violence or about crime, drugs on campus, things like that, but any concern, anything you might be struggling with as a student. Here is a place that you can share this information and know that it's going to be addressed by the correct person in a timely and appropriate manner. So we do open all of these fields up to students shown. We know that from our data, programs that allow students to share any concern are a lot more successful and more engaged than programs that focus on just one thing, whether that be crime or school violence. So, come on. I think this one broke too. Here, just click that. So just to give you guys, I can stand right here too. Just to give you guys a little bit of example. So this is data that was collected from a couple of our active programs, state programs in larger districts. We're in 11,000 schools nationwide, so we've been doing this for quite some time. But you can just see the volume of concerns that are reported, and really we've noticed over the years that suicide threats are one of the #1 concerns that are reported. So I just wanted to give you guys just a little bit so you can see what kids on campus are dealing with. And there we go, that's good. So when your student sends a report through our app, yeah, there we go. Who's gonna be addressing that? Well, Ryan, the team at SCUCISD has done a really good job of it's a collaborative effort, multidisciplinary team consisting of your SROs, your law enforcement, your school administrators, counselors, mental health professionals. And this really assures that any report that comes in from a student is going to be addressed properly. We think it's really important. And it also, school safety, has, I'm going to get on my little soapbox, I promise I won't. School safety has a number of different components, and prevention is key in all of them. And so we want to make sure that your kids' needs are being addressed properly. If you're concerned that Susie might have an eating disorder, that doesn't necessarily warrant law enforcement involvement, but somebody needs to be told so Susie's parents can be notified, right? And so multidisciplinary teams are the way to do that. If you guys are interested, a really great study was released in January, again by the U.S. Secret Service and Department of Education, called Enhancing School Safety. And they've got some really wonderful recommendations. One of those is anonymous reporting and multidisciplinary teams. So you guys can read, all of that's available online, and you can read that and just kind of learn a little bit more about why it's important to have a number of different team members handling reports and making sure that nothing falls through the cracks. And again, from the same data pool that we had in the previous slide, these are the outcomes, the top outcomes taken from those schools regarding all of those reports. And as you guys can see, 90% of the outcomes are, parents are notified. And that's really kind of the key. This is not just a tool for school administrators. This is a tool to empower students and parents to know what's going on and to be able to take the appropriate action and get kids help if they need it. So it's very simple. We make it extremely easy for your student to send a report. We have an app available on Google Play or the iTunes App Store. Or if you don't want to download the app, anything that has a web browser, you can make a report through p3campus.com. And it really does walk the student through what to report, and what information to provide. Not only can they report, just fill out, the report form, they can add things like screenshots, video, audio. We know today that what happens on school campuses doesn't necessarily stay on school campuses. Everyone is connected 24/7, whether that's through social media, texting, and bullying doesn't stay on school campus. It carries over to the internet. And so this allows students to, who are on their phones, who are on the computers, social media constantly, to be able to share information. We really like the screenshot. And I talked about how, maybe you have a student who isn't too confident in filling out a report, but they've got this image that they just want somebody to know that this was posted on social media. They want somebody to know that this was just sent to them. And this allows you, your student, to send that to the appropriate administrators and personnel so that it can be handled. Another feature of P3 Campus is that reporters engage in two-way dialogue. If your student downloads the app, when they send a report, one of the members from the multidisciplinary team is going to be responding to that report. And this is another way to, A, validate that the student's concern has been heard, and that it's important. It's important to say something. This also allows school officials and your multidisciplinary team to engage that student if more information is needed, or if that student has more information to share. So being able to talk back and forth with our students is really, opening. I was reading just a minute ago some of these belief statements, and I love how some of them really go in line, hand in hand. Good communication is critical to success. We want to open that line of communication for you guys and for your students. So this is one of the ways that we do that through our app. Another really important component is 24/7 monitoring. All apps will be monitored 24/7. Data shows that our students are most active after hours. A lot of times, even reporting at school through an app, the fear that somebody might see you and know what you're doing, that's there. And so a lot of times our students will wait till they're home to say something. And sometimes, we do have life-threatening issues that come in, and that's why 24/7 is such a key component. We've got statewide programs, like I said, in Nevada, and Michelle, you can correct me on the numbers, but I believe last year they received and were able to intervene in about 58 suicides or attempted suicides. And so this is key. We want to make sure that they know we're here for them. SCUCISD is here for them at all times, and this just really helps build confidence with the students as well. So really, it's just about speaking up. Everything is preventable. The signs are there. Your students know what's going on, and we're here. SCUCISD has done a great job getting everybody ready to make sure that when your students speak up, they continue to be empowered, they continue to feel like their voice means something, and that they have a say and they have a role in making their campus safe and healthy for everyone, because that's how we ensure that the learning environment is a productive learning environment. And really, that's all I've got for you guys today. If you guys have any questions, there are some really good videos. Our national organization that we partner with, Sandy Hook Promise, has done some really good videos. They are all available on YouTube, which unfortunately we could not share tonight, but if you guys look them up, it's just Sandy Hook Promise. They have some really good videos that really just kind of go in depth a little bit more about knowing the signs and about how to speak up. So you guys can also follow us, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. We constantly have updates. We love highlighting districts, and we're really excited to see the steps that SCUCISD is taking to give your students the tools to play an active role in making sure their campus is safe. So thank you guys.
And just kind of piggybacking off of that, every campus, intermediate, junior high, and high school campus will have their multidisciplinary team. consisting of counselors and administrators as well. So I did just want to add that bit of information. Our next speaker is Ms. Patricia Castillo, and she is with the Peace Initiative, and she's going to be speaking on the dangers of dating violence. Ms. Castillo.
All right. Oh, good. I'm glad it's up over there. I was a little nervous because I hadn't seen it. Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for being here tonight. My name is Patricia Castillo, and I run the Peace Initiative, and it's a nonprofit that's been around since 1990. And in San Antonio, we formed around the charge or the challenge that was given to us by survivors of domestic violence and by people who actively work in community to address family violence. And that was in 1990, and we formed the Peace Initiative around that. And then, of course, the challenge also became to look at how the whole issue was being responded to by our community. And the first entity that we were challenged to look at was SAPD, our police department. And then we formed a program called Family Assistance Crisis Teams. And within SAPD, that goes by FACT, the acronym, FACT. And from there, we formed a group of volunteers, citizen volunteers, that we recruited, screened, and trained to become part of SAPD's response to cases of family violence, relationship violence, dating violence, teen dating violence, right? We do those trainings with SAPD every quarter. And since 1990, we have never missed one quarter of training. And usually in all of those trainings, an average of 27 citizens show up for that training. And so at any given time in San Antonio, our city will have an average of 150 trained, skilled, knowledgeable citizen volunteers that are ready to work with our police department handling cases of dating violence, relationship violence, teen dating violence, elder domestic violence. We have that too, unfortunately. And so they work on Friday and Saturday nights out of all the police substations that surround the city of San Antonio, and they are scheduled to work only one shift per month, which is an 8-hour shift. They work from 7 p.m. until 2, sometimes 3, sometimes 4 in the morning, just depending on what's happening, right? Because those are the peak times for this kind of violence to erupt on the weekends. And so that's when we need our volunteers on duty, because that's when all of our offices are closed, right? And so we have the citizens available to do that work with SAPD and for our community. And that's one of the programs that we're proudest of, because we've already put over 3,000 citizens through that training program since 1990. And the other program that we're founders of is another program that we founded alongside Bexar County that's called Project Advance. And that's a program that addresses violence with people that are first-time arrestees of domestic violence. And they come and do an 18-hour course with Peace Initiative once they've been arrested. And they really can't have like serious drug problems or mental health problems. And so we work with them in that 18-hour course. We are graduating 87% of the people that show up in our program. And we also find that up to 2 years after they've graduated from us, 75% of them are not getting rearrested for domestic violence. And so education is a powerful tool. And once people know what they can do to address their issues, then if they have those tools in hand, they're much more apt to address them. And so we're starting our 7th year of funding with Bexar County to do that work, and I hope to keep growing that effort as well, because the idea is to keep people out of this behavior and keep people out of jail, because this stuff by nature is cyclical and repetitive, and once you fall into that pattern, then you just keep getting rearrested, and your charges get worse and your fines get worse, and you could end up in prison or you could end up dead. And so the idea is to intervene early. And like you said in your presentation, these things are preventable. Let's just do something about it, right? Instead of, not talking about it or pretending it doesn't exist or pretending that somebody else is going to handle it. It's got to be us, right? We're the ones that are going to do this work. So we define this behavior as any abusive or coercive behavior or threat that's used to control an intimate partner. And so it becomes established as a pattern of manipulative and violent tactics, and victims then are forced to change their behavior because of the violence that they're experiencing. So what are some of the ways that a victim might change their behavior because they're being abused? Yeah, they become isolated. They quit hanging out with their friends. What else? Anything else? They let other people speak for them, especially their perpetrator. That's right. What? Anything else? Bruises?
Like things that label them as someone else's
property?
Yes.
Especially in human trafficking. Especially in human trafficking, you will see those kind of tags. Tattoos, markings on their bodies that are indicators, right? And unfortunately, domestic violence also is a feeder to the crime of human trafficking. We're also making very powerful connections and links between domestic violence and people getting caught up in the human trafficking field as well. So they change. They might quit going to school. They might be absent all the time. Their grades might start to fall. They start doing drinking or drugging when they didn't used to before. They might quit their extracurricular activities in school. They might it's just, any number of things, right, that a survivor has to do in order to survive, right? Complying oftentimes is something that tells them if you comply, you won't get hit, right? And so they tend to do that kind of stuff. It's perpetrated by adults and adolescents against their intimate partner. We have a very serious teen dating violence problem in Texas and across our nation. And laws have changed to address this issue. In Texas, for example, teenagers can now apply for protective orders on their own. Teenagers can press charges on their own against their perpetrators. Teenagers are now allowed to go to the battered women's shelter if they're no longer safe at their parents' home. And before, it used to be that you had to have a baby in order to be allowed into the battered women's shelter as a teenager, okay? Not anymore. You can now go even though you're not a teen parent. And the other thing too is that public policies have been enacted to allow for an expert on domestic violence to become part of the student health advisory councils because we know how pervasive this stuff is. And so that's another opportunity for making sure this information is getting into your schools to help youth and to help the teachers and other administrative people to be a source of help to teenagers, right? It can occur in all kinds of relationships of married people, cohabitating people, people from all lifestyles, right? Homosexual, same-sex, bisexual, transgender relationships. It cuts across all the economic barriers, all the educational barriers, all the faith barriers. It cuts across all the race and ethnicity barriers. So in other words, this can happen to any of us. And so there's not a lot of stuff out there that'll protect us from it, except that we do know that if people are knowledgeable about it, then they're much more apt to be aware and to stay away from potential abusers. But it does cross all of the different barriers. It can include psychological and verbal abuse, and verbal abuse is usually how it starts. So, you know, when I'm in the schools, I usually tell the girls, you know, you guys need to be really careful about how you talk to each other and how you address each other, because the boys are listening, you know, and girls tend to call each other all kinds of horrible names, right? And if the guys see that you guys call each other those horrible names, then they think they can call you those names too. You know, and you got to think about that, right? And you know, to be also the ones to set the standard, right? About what kind of a person they're willing to, you know, allow to be at their side, right? In a relationship, in an intimate relationship, right? There's sexual assault and sexual abuse. These couples tend to become isolated little by little, so there's progressive social isolation of these couples. They can be deprived of certain things. What kinds of things do you think people in abusive relationships can be deprived of? What can you be deprived of in an abusive relationship? Food, money, absolutely. Yes. You know, having a social life with other people. They can make you quit going to school. I remember when I was doing classes for the Edgewood School District, the police chief over there was telling me, Patricia, I have to drive around the neighborhood and do rescue missions of these girls that their boyfriends don't let them go to school because, you know, somebody's looking at them, you know, and they're jealous and they don't want to be jealous, so they don't let them go to school, right? And so the chief and his officers were running around the district, you know, finding these girls that were being held in their, you know, in the guy's parents' home, right? And not allowed to go to school. And so, you know, those kinds of things are going on out there. Pet abuse and economic coercion are also part of this picture. Pets can now be included in protective orders. I don't know if y'all knew this, but you can, and officers, when they go into homes, when they're looking for looking at these cases of domestic violence, they're looking to see if the pets are injured. Because the thing is that injuring a pet in a situation of relationship violence is a felony. Okay, and so that would be the higher charge, right? Than if you get punched in the face and, you know, you end up with a black eye, that's going to be a misdemeanor. Okay, and so yeah, we had way more shelters for abused pets way before we had shelters for battered women. So that's one of the things about our country. That's true. So without intervention, the attacks become more severe and more frequent, okay? This is not an anger management problem or necessarily a learned behavior. Oftentimes we tend to think of victims as poor and people of color and uneducated and straight people, right? This is, you know, we need to move away from that kind of, you know, mentality that, right, that it only happens to those people over there. Right, you know, and I think that's probably one of our defense mechanisms, right? Because we don't want to think that that stuff is happening in people from my group or my community, right? We also tend to blame it on alcohol abuse, and alcohol and drugs is not the cause of this type of violence, but it is something that factors in big, right? Somebody who's sober might slap you, but somebody who's got a 12-pack in them might knock your teeth out. Okay, so it'll make it worse, right? And that's the kind of stuff that, you know, people that are taking these calls, the dispatchers, they want to know, you know, what kind of condition the people are in, because then that tells them what kind of situation an officer, a first responder, is walking into, right? We tend to call it just a bad relationship thing, that it's, you know, no big deal. It's just, you know, they fight. Hey, you know, fights. But, you know, that's a way of dismissing it or minimizing it. And we can't do that anymore with this kind of stuff. It's getting really bad, right? In San Antonio, for example, we're already at 25 women who've been murdered due to domestic violence for this year. And the year is not over. And last year, we had a total of 11 for 2017. Okay, so we've more than doubled the number of women that have been murdered so far, and it's going to get worse. And we find in San Antonio that the holidays are a particularly bad time for domestic violence and relationship violence. That it's a family issue, that's another way of us dismissing it or minimizing it. And it's a way of us saying, oh, it's none of my business. Right? I shouldn't get involved. You know, it's none of my business. But the reality is that think about all the institutions that get charged with responding to this type of violence. What are some of the institutions that have to respond when there's violence going on in a family? If it becomes like outed, right? The police, okay, so there's law enforcement. In our city, the police are 68% of the city budget, okay? So that's a lot of cop time that you're paying for. And the other reality about our city, 50% of a police officer's time is spent responding to family violence. So think about all the money that's being spent and used responding, okay? EMTs have to respond if there's somebody injured, right? So that's another aspect of it. Another huge chunk of our city budget, right? Then if it goes to court, then you have Bexar County court systems, right? You've got 2 family violence Bexar County courts that we got to pay for. Then all the staff in there, right? The court reporters and all of those people, right? And then if kids are being abused, then Child Protective Services is another entity that we have to pay for, right? To get involved in these families. And, you know, that comes out of all of our pockets, right? We're the ones paying for all of that. So I wouldn't consider this a private matter anymore, right? I don't. And this is something we're all paying for with our tax dollars. The shelter, the battered women's shelter, then, if somebody needs to be sheltered. If children get removed from a family because of all the violence going on between their parents, then they get to be put in the children's shelter, right? If there's no family members that can take them. So you see what I'm saying about how this is not a private family matter anymore? Another common thing that people say, that it's a man's right to run his own home. And I'm okay with that, you know, but as long as I don't have to be paying for the consequences of how that happens, right? I'm all right with that. Okay, so I'm missing part of my presentation. So 40% of victims had left or were in the process of leaving the abuser. This is talking about now about how when people get killed in domestic violence. It's usually when they're in the process of leaving, okay? Victims' ages range from 15 to 92, so therein goes the high school aspect of it, right? One of the most recent cases we had in San Antonio was the teenage couple that were getting ready to graduate. And he went over to her house and shot her, and then left and went and shot himself. And they were seniors in high school. And that happened last May, right? And so, and then to me, it's just so sad that you have people that are age 92 who are being abused in an abusive relationship. I mean, 92, really? Come on, right? But we do have a lot of elder domestic violence happening in our communities, and we've got to be paying attention to that as well, right? Because elderly people also are very isolated. And so when people are isolated, this stuff can happen and go on without anybody detecting it, right? 68% of perpetrators used a firearm when they murdered their victim. And so guns and domestic violence are a very bad combination, right? And then sadly, 77% were killed in their home, okay? And so home, what is home supposed to be for all of us? The safest place you can be, right? The safest place to go to. That's supposed to be your sanctuary, your refuge. And yet, in this type of crime, you know, 77% of them are happening in their own home. And I already talked to you about the 25 women that have been killed so far in Bexar County. And then the other reason why our country pays attention to the issue of domestic violence is all the other crimes that are intersecting with domestic violence, such as simple assault, trespassing, vandalism, malicious damage to property, disorderly conducts, violations of protective orders, violations, failure to relinquish a phone. We have a lot of cases of situations where people are trying to call the emergency 911 system to get help, and their abuser will take the phone and destroy it so that they don't have access to the emergency 911 system. Well, now you can press charges for that, right? Because nobody should ever be denied access to the emergency 911 system, okay? All right. You also have felony assaults, stalking, sexual assault, animal abuse, kidnapping, child snatchings, homicides, murder, suicides, and now we're getting into that whole realm of human trafficking and sexual slavery, right? How do you think that intersects? What's the deal between human trafficking and sexual slavery and domestic violence? What is that connection? What do y'all think?
Probably lays the groundwork for a pattern of relationships that lead someone to be more susceptible to the abuser and things coming back.
Mm-hmm. That's true. Yes, sir.
Children involved and they run away and then they fall for the traffickers and then maybe caught and run away.
That's the main way that we see the intersection, is that our kids in households where there's a lot of violence, the kids are neglected, the kids are lonely, the kids are looking for somebody to pay attention to them, the kids are wanting to be loved, the kids are seeking somebody to be there for them. And, you know, with their parents so involved in the abusive relationship, the kids are not getting any of that from the parents, right? And so then they get onto those little apps on their phone, and guess what? Guess who's lurking on those little apps on their phones? You know, all those posers and all those losers that are looking for kids to, you know, pull into that realm of human trafficking and sexual slavery. And so we're losing a lot of kids to this kind of stuff because of domestic violence. And so it's something to really pay attention to. Now, it's real easy for us to say, please, you know, get out, leave, right, to somebody who's in an abusive relationship. It's real easy. And, you know, or say something like, if I was you, I would have left a long time ago, right? But the thing is that that's usually when victims get killed, when they're in the process of leaving. And, you know, all you got to do is kind of pay attention to the news, and you'll see how, like that girl from Highlands High School who was murdered, you know, she was refusing to take his calls. She had broken up with him. She didn't want to be with him because he was violent. And, you know, she was trying to completely sever her ties to him. And that's when he went over there and shot her, right? Because she wouldn't take his calls. A lot of times it's when the person has just gone to go press charge. Times it's when the person has just gone to go file for a protective order or file for divorce. That's usually when people end up dead. And so safety planning is a very important piece of the work that we do with survivors of domestic violence. Is we sit down with them and work out their safety plans with them in terms of their lifestyle, right? How they live their lives, what they do, and how we can help them stay safe while they're in the process of ending the abusive relationship. So one study revealed that 1/2 of homicides of female spouses were committed by men after they separated from their abusers. After they separated Okay, so that's why this stuff is very important. Now, these are some of the questions that our officers are trained to ask somebody who's being abused to determine whether or not their situation can become lethal. In other words, deadly. Does this person have the capacity to kill their victim, right? So one of the things that victims will say is, you know, he's told me that I can't have you, and if I can't have you, then nobody's going to have you, right? And so even if that means I'll kill you and then kill myself, right? There's also a lot of threats of suicide. A lot of women threaten their, women that are abusers, girls and adult women that are abusers use suicide threats as part of their way of controlling their partners, right? If you leave me or break up with me, I'll kill myself. And, you know, they don't want to walk around with that on their head, right? The murdering of pets. If pets have been injured or killed, you know, to demonstrate to the victim what this person is capable of, then, you know, this is another sign, a big red flag, right? If they're obsessive about their partner, what are some examples of obsessive behavior in an abusive relationship? Controlling what you wear, okay? How you dress, how you look, whether or not you wear makeup, if so, how much, you know, all of that kind of stuff. What else? What's another way of obsessing? Yes, you have to report in, check in at all times, right? Who you're with, what you're doing, who you're talking to, what you're talking about, right? All of that stuff has to be reported in, right? You know, those people that'll sit in their car across the street from your job all day long, you know, watching you, waiting for you, making sure you don't leave. The people who text you, you know, 50 times, you know, every 10 minutes. Right? Texting you, checking on you. And you got to respond within a certain amount of time, right? Otherwise, what are you doing if you haven't responded within that amount of time, right? So that's kind of the obsessive behavior that we see. Stalking, harassment. If it's the end of the relationship, then these people tend to view the situation as desperate, right? Like, I don't have anything to lose, you know, to kill you and kill myself, right? Or if they've already lost their job, if they've already lost their housing, you know, those kinds of things. If they've lost custody of their kids, you know, that kind of stuff, right? That kind of stuff throws them over the edge, right? And so if they respond yes to any of this stuff, then the officers know that this person is in grave danger, right? Another one that I don't have up there is strangulation. Strangulation is a big deal, and people call it choking, right? They incorrectly refer to it as choking. But strangulation, we have found, is a huge indicator. If somebody has the capacity to strangle you to where you pass out or black out, that person has the capacity to kill you. Okay? And so when strangulation first became a felony in Texas about 6 years ago, Chief McManus ordered for all the police officers to, if a victim reported having been strangled, he asked the officers to go and walk warrants, like get a warrant immediately to arrest this person and to jail them, right? And right after that law went into effect, our arrests for strangulation in San Antonio shot up by 45%. And because all of the victims were reporting that they had been strangled, right? And so, you know, this is a very serious situation of strangulation. At all of the national conferences, when you go for domestic violence, there's like whole tracks just on domestic violence for social workers, for doctors, for nurses, you know, because there's all kinds of, you know, physiological things that they look for, you know, to prove their cases, right? The busted veins in their face or in the whites of their eyes, and the what is it called? Something. Anyways, I can't remember the word. But so it's a very serious link also to this whole stuff. All right. So these are some of the ways the victim is too often viewed as the cause of domestic violence. So I hear people out in the community when I talk about this stuff say things like, oh, miss, but she likes it. You know, that's why she stays. Otherwise, I mean, if she didn't like it, she would have left a long time ago, right? You know, and the thing is that really, you know, don't find people that like being mistreated and abused, right? Or that people ask for it by way of their behavior. You know, that whole provocation thing, right? And that if she can't keep her man happy, then it's her fault she gets hit. What about that one? It's horrible, right? And so, you know, but people say that kind of stuff, right? Or that it's her job to make sure that everything runs well in the household. And in reality nowadays, with both parents working, everybody busy doing all kinds of stuff, it's everybody's job to make a household run smoothly, right? Not just one person. And, you know, the other thing too is that a lot of times people don't believe it because the person doesn't look like a victim, right? And the reality is that victims know how to play this stuff off, right? Survivors know how to play it off. Survivors know how to put up that facade. Survivors do what they got to do to try to keep their family together, to try to, you know, put people off in terms of, you know, having this stuff come out, right? And what are some of the reasons that they hide that way? What are the reasons that they, you know, will put up those fronts? It's big. Shame is big. And in our, like in my, you know, Spanish speaking community, we call it vergüenza. And vergüenza is like, you know, shame times 1,000, you know? You know, it's like, yeah, it's like really bad, right? You just don't put that kind of stuff out about your family, right? Air out your dirty laundry, you just don't, right? And so, you know, shame is a big one. The number one reason why people don't want this stuff to get out is because they're so afraid of what the consequences are going to be, right? And so fear is the number one reason. So it's not caused by anger or loss of temper. This stuff is caused by attitudes and beliefs that one person has the right to control another person. Okay? And so that really encompasses whether your abuser is a male, whether your abuser is a female, whether the couple is gay or straight or bisexual or transgender or whatever. But it's all about the belief and the attitude that the people have, right? Whoever they are, whatever gender they are, whatever lifestyle they are, right? The anger is an excuse for the batterers to go off, the abusers to go off, to quote unquote lose control, right? If abusers couldn't control themselves, they'd beat up their bosses at work, wouldn't they? Right? Because they're mad at their boss. But at work, you have consequences, right? And at home, you know, there's some ways that you can figure out to not have consequences, right? And abusers are able to control themselves at work, and so they don't, you know, go off and lose their cool and beat up their bosses, right? Because they don't want to deal with the consequences. Okay. Alcohol does not cause the domestic violence. We already talked a little bit about that, but it does lower people's inhibitions. And so they take more chances, they take more risks, they can be more violent and more abusive because they're under the influence, right? And it's important to note that there's many men and women who abuse alcohol and don't beat up their spouses and don't abuse their partners, right? And then there's, you know, people who are sober that are horribly violent, very scary, right? And don't do any drugs or alcohol, right? Okay, so this is about power and control. So when somebody gets called on the carpet, somebody's pressing charges against them, somebody, you know, has had their partner arrested, they get sent to the batterers intervention and prevention programs that we have here in Bexar County. And the Battered Women's Shelter runs those programs, right? And if this is their first time of being arrested and they don't have other serious problems, they might also get referred to my program, the Project Advance, right? But once, you know, if you fail Project Advance and then you start getting rearrested for domestic violence, then you get referred on to the more serious ones, the BIP programs, Batterers, Intervention, and Prevention programs. Now those, you get court mandated into those programs, and you have to pay to take those classes. Those are $20 an hour, those classes. You can't miss those classes, and when you're in the class, you have to participate, and you have to be actively involved in the educational program. Now, I think one of the downfalls of these programs is that they are not therapeutic, okay? They are educational. And so the education is important, but what we also have to realize is that when people are abusers, men and women, it's because they've been abused, usually. And so they need therapeutic help for whatever traumas they've experienced and have never gotten help for. And so I wish that somehow the court mandate could be, yes, go and learn about domestic violence, but also get some therapy. You know, minimum 50 hours of therapy, you know what I'm saying? Because people need to heal. People need to heal. We're the walking wounded, you guys. And so, you know, when we've been traumatized, we need help, all of us. And so we don't have that as a mandate for, you know, people that get ordered into these programs of you know, the Batterers Intervention and Prevention program. So the victim does not have control over the batterer's violence. And we also see that a lot of these perpetrators move from one victim to the next. And they do the same behavior, right? I was just working a case yesterday, Sunday, and the woman got beat up out at some ranch in Bandera, Texas, and she was texting the guys, her boyfriend's ex-wife, and the ex-wife said, you need to leave him because he's going to do the same thing to you like he did to me. And she was like, if you knew he did this to you, why didn't you tell me? You know, and she goes, well, I didn't know, I didn't want to get involved. And she goes, apparently he's been beating up his 2 ex-wives, you know, and but none of them told me anything when they saw me getting involved with him. And, you know, and so this is a very common behavior that you see, that perpetrators will just move from one victim to the next. And early on, when we started doing this work in Bexar County, we used to have a court monitoring program to see how the courts were handling them. And that was one of the things that we found, was that it was very common for these guys to be going to court back and forth on several different victims. Okay, so that's why accountability is so important. That's why therapy is so important. That's why healing is so important, so that you don't perpetrate the same kind of behavior on one person after another. Okay, so remember that violence is always a choice. Everybody has stress, right? We all have stress? Everybody lives stressful lives, right? We all do. But not all of us do this kind of violent behavior, right? So it's definitely a choice. Now, these are some of the barriers to why people don't leave. And, you know, there's just any number of them, right? Money, or the lack of money, right? Where would you go, right? I don't know about you guys in this area of town, but affordable housing in San Antonio is like non-existent, right? Fear for the children, religious pressures, right? If you come from a family that's very faith-based, you know, or you believe in vows and all of that kind of stuff, that's part of your upbringing and the stuff that you live by, your family traditions, your family beliefs. A lot of people don't believe in divorce. A lot of people don't believe in just, you know, breaking up their families. And so, you know, we often have to work within those parameters, right, to help people. Family shame issues and pressures, lack of education or training, because now, you know, if you're going to leave and you're going to take the kids, then you're going to have to be a provider too, right? And what if you don't have experience in the workplace, right? That's going to be tough. Cultural isolation, transportation issues. Fear is really the #1 issue. Housing concerns. Who's going to pay for child care? Everybody knows how expensive childcare is, right? You know, if you've got to now go to work. Denial that things are so bad, that's a very common reason, you know, why people won't leave, because they're in denial about how bad their situation is. And they have hope that their situation is going to change, that their partner's going to change, right? And they want to hang on to that hope, right? They love the people who abuse them also, right? And who are we to question that? We're nobody to question that, right? Sometimes they fall into depression, and when people are depressed, it's hard for them to act on their own behalf, right? Because they're so depressed. The other thing that, like this case that I was working yesterday, I told her, I said, you need to go find somewhere to sleep and rest. And she was like, how did you know I was so exhausted? And I said, I can just tell. I know that this is a common thing for survivors, is that they don't get sleep. They sleep in spurts. They sleep in little segments because they've got to be hyper vigilant all the time. And so they don't get any rest. And then if you don't get any rest and sleep, like good 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 hours of sleep, like nonstop, you get depressed, right? And then you can't think. You can't make decisions. And getting out of an abusive relationship requires, you got to be alert, you got to be on your toes, you got to be questioning, you got to be challenging, you got to be finding out information, you got to be looking for housing, jobs, childcare, all of it. You got to be on top of it. Plus you got somebody chasing you, trying to kill you because they're mad because you left them, right? It's hard work to get out of those kind of situations, right? And so, you know, we got to really take all of that into consideration when somebody is stuck in an abusive relationship, right? And so what we see then is people who might take 5 to 7 times of coming and going, breaking up, going back, breaking up, going back, breaking up, going back, because they're trying to figure it all out. They're trying to learn what's out there for them. They're trying to see if that agency's going to give them what they said they were going to give them. Right? And so they're learning, they're going through a learning process, right? And then there's fear of retaliation, right? Or they might be afraid of the police response. I've had so many cases where the women said, I quit calling the police because they're not helpful. You know, and that's not good. That's not good. We need our public servants to be, you know, doing the right thing. And you know, we want them to the community to know that they can turn to law enforcement, right? So I often have to tell people, look, if you didn't get a good response from that patrol officer who showed up at your house, the next day when it's safe, go to the substation and talk to one of the crisis response teams that are there that are specialized in domestic violence, and let them take your report, right? And so we often have to do stuff like that as well. Now, this is a list of resources that's available with regard to this. I don't know if y'all can see that, or if you want to take a picture. Oh, and plus I brought handouts too. And this sheet is one of those lists of resources if you want to help yourself to the paper stuff that's on the table that you might find helpful and useful. And you're welcome also, if you take any of that stuff, to make copies. And, you know, get them to the people you work with, the families you serve, the folks that need the information, right? And this is the National Teen Dating Abuse Helpline. This was, you know, recently created. The NFL gave Texas Council on Family Violence a bunch of money to set that up. And so, yeah, that was one of the things that they had to do because of their, you know, little episodes. But, you know, as long as they're doing right, you know, and trying to do right. And so that thing got set up with that. And then, of course, the National Domestic Violence Hotline. And the TTY is for people that are hearing impaired, right? And who need help that way. But, oh, and by the way, on these helplines, you guys, they translate in up to 141 languages. Okay? And so that's to show you, too, that, you know, this happens to people from all over the world. Okay? And in our country, there's people here from all over the world. And so, you know, if there's language barriers, we need to get past that and get people connected to help. Okay? Any questions or comments for me? No, I'm happy to be here, and let me know if there's anything else we need to do, or if we need to be talking to students or anything like that. I'm happy to see what we can work out about that as well. Okay? All right. Thank you, Ryan, for inviting me.
Okay, we just want to say thank you to our speakers from P3 and also Ms. Castillo. And in the future, we will possibly have more of these summits, and we will let you know on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. But we want to thank you for watching and for being here, and have a good night.